This video is brought to you by Ground News. When Trump first floated buying Greenland, most commentators dismissed his musings as classic Trump bluster, part of what Trump likes to call the weave. However, over the weekend, it became overwhelmingly clear, if there was any remaining doubt, that Trump is 100% serious about getting his hands on the world's largest island. The Financial Times reported over the weekend that Trump held a fiery 45-minute call to discuss the issue with Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, which sources described as, quote, horrendous. And on Saturday, the president told reporters on Air Force One, quote, we're going to have it. So in this video, we're going to try our best to figure out why Trump is so keen on Greenland. Hint, it might be in part about Canada, and whether his reasons actually make sense. Explore which world leaders are winning and which are losing every week with our new podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. So let's get straight into it. As we see it, there are at least 4 reasons that Trump is interested in Greenland: Arctic geopolitics, the UK-Iceland gap, its mineral deposits, and Canada. Let's start with reason 1, Arctic geopolitics. When Trump first floated buying Greenland in his first term, he framed it as a sort of massive real estate deal, and mainly emphasised the economic advantages to an American purchase. This time, however, he's been talking more about national security, which is probably a reference to the escalating geopolitical competition between especially the US and Russia in the Arctic. In short, climate change means the ice cover over the Arctic Sea is receding, especially during the summer months. This has 2 main consequences. First, it means that certain mineral and hydrocarbon deposits in the Arctic have now become more accessible. And second, it's opened up the possibility of new commercial trade routes going through the Arctic. There are currently 2 main routes through the Arctic: the Northwest Passage, which goes along the northern Canadian and Alaskan coasts, and the Northeast Passage, which follows the Russian and Norwegian coasts. Climate change will allow for more regular passage through both these routes, and potentially even open up a new route straight through the Arctic, known as the Transpolar Route, which could dramatically reduce shipping times, particularly for trade between Asia and Europe. This has invited interest from both Russia and China. Since 2015, for instance, Russia has been reopening old Soviet bases in the region, building some new ones, and investing in Arctic equipment like icebreakers. Similarly, in 2018, China declared itself a near-Arctic state, launched its first domestically produced heavy icebreaker, and started talking about a new polar Silk Road in the region. The 2 countries have also cooperated on Arctic issues, carrying out a number of joint military exercises in the region, although it's worth stressing that Russia has a far more developed military presence here, and there are a fair few points of tension over issues like Arctic governance, where Russia wants to maintain the status quo, but China wants more influence. Anyway, this has all sparked some anxiety in Washington, although we should say that while analysts and politicians often talk in euphemistic language about the Arctic's geopolitical significance, it's not clear what exactly the US is worried about here. Whether they're worried about Russia controlling the new Arctic shipping routes, Russia and China getting their hands on these newly accessible minerals, or an actual military conflict in the region. Anyway, whatever the precise anxiety, this sense that the Arctic is somehow geopolitically significant, plus the growing Russian presence in the region, has got America interested, and purchasing Greenland is the most obvious way of expanding America's Arctic presence. Although it's worth saying that the US already has a base in Greenland, which currently provides an early warning system for missile defence. While the development of further bases requires consent from both Denmark and Greenland, both governments have recently signalled that they're open to a larger US presence on the island. Anyway, the second reason is the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, which the US wants to control in order to guarantee that an adversary navy, like Russia's Northern Navy, couldn't exit the Norwegian Sea and approach the United States, or threaten transport between the US and Europe. The gap became less important after the end of the Cold War, but it's attracted more attention in recent years, both because of heightened tensions between Russia and the West, and because the British Navy is no longer really able to effectively police the gap, as it did during the Cold War. Expanding America's military presence in Greenland would allow them to better monitor the gap, although again, it's not clear they need to actually buy Greenland to do this. The third reason is Greenland's mineral deposits, which were explicitly referenced by Trump's national security advisor Mike Waltz during an interview with Fox News earlier this month. While estimates vary somewhat, there's a pretty wide consensus that Greenland has relatively large deposits of hydrocarbons and certain metals, which will become more accessible as climate change melts the island's ice. The hope here isn't just that Greenland will allow the US to pump even more oil and gas, but also that its deposits of metals, and especially the so-called rare earth metals, will allow the US to reduce its dependence on China, which currently accounts for something like 90% of all rare earth exports. However, there are at least two caveats worth mentioning here. First, every few years or so, there's a sudden spike in interest in Greenland's minerals, usually when the price of oil and other commodities rise. But this reliably peters out once investors realise how inaccessible they are, or how expensive their extraction will be. Second, rare earth elements are slightly misnamed. They're not actually that rare geologically. Greenland's deposits aren't that large by international standards, and the real issue is that their extraction and processing is dirty and polluting. The US actually used to be the world's biggest producer of rare earths, before they essentially decided to offshore the dirty work of processing them to poorer countries like China. Even if there are usable deposits, Greenlanders will probably resist their extraction, and Greenland's Uranium Act, passed by the devolved government in 2021, effectively bans rare earth mining already, on the grounds that uranium is often found alongside rare earth deposits. The same year, the government said they were going to stop issuing new prospecting licenses for oil and gas, which means that any Trump-inspired plans to turn Greenland into a mining haven would probably face domestic opposition from Greenlanders. Anyway, the fourth and final reason we think Trump wants Greenland is Canada. While he now talks less about annexing Canada than the Panama Canal or Greenland, Trump made it pretty clear a few weeks ago, in his ideal world, he'd like to incorporate Canada too, meaning the US would cover the vast majority of continental North America. It's very possible that Trump thinks annexing Greenland will put pressure on Canada to eventually accede. After all, once he's got Greenland, Canada will be surrounded on all sides by American territory, with Alaska to the west, the bulk of the US to the south, and Greenland to the east. This argument was explicitly made by the US government way back in 1867, the first time they tried to buy Greenland, months after they'd bought Alaska, which was also sold by the Russian Empire to put pressure on the British position in North America. All in all, while seizing Greenland probably isn't a great idea in the first place, even the arguments that might be motivating Trump's apparent interest don't necessarily stand up to scrutiny. And this is just one of many slightly wild stories coming out of the new Trump administration, and it's unlikely to get any more stable anytime soon. So if you're looking to better understand what's going on right now, thankfully there's Ground News, a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. They pull in stories from all over the world and organise them by story, and every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality and ownership of all the sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organisations. Right away you can see that this story about Trump and Greenland had 106 outlets reporting on it, with 31% of those sources leaning left, while 40% lean right. With outlets on the left more likely to describe Trump's attempts to take Greenland as worrying or greedy, while those on the right tend to focus on how important this is to Trump and how serious he is. One of my favourite features of theirs is My News Bias. It's basically a fitness tracker, but for news. It tracks my reading habits over time, my trends in political bias, the specific news outlets I read the most, even the specific topics I gravitate towards. It's been really helpful in minimising my personal blind spots. Now, as an impartial news outlet, we're passionate about informing our viewers about bias and helping them to understand how it affects the media they consume. Ground News is very effective at this, showing you exactly how each side of the political divide covers each story you see online. And best of all, we're currently offering viewers 40% off their Vantage plan, which includes unlimited access to all of their amazing features like their blind spot feed. So go to ground.news/TLDR, click the QR code here on screen, or use the link in the description to subscribe today.